Hannah peered at the letters etched into the RV's wooden interior, the jagged scrawls so deep she could slide a fingertip into the grooves. The words had been carved with meticulous insistence. You cannot bury what you bring with you. She eased back on her heels, tracing the inscription's edges in her mind. 4 other sets of eyes hovered behind her, each lost in their own discomfort. The message seemed to linger in the narrow aisle, a silent threat that no one could ignore. They had been on the road for 3 days, traveling the American Southwest, scrubby deserts and dusty highways, for a spontaneous vacation. It was meant to be a carefree journey of nights in small towns, swapped stories, and a running joke about who would choose the cheapest roadside diner next. But ever since someone discovered that cryptic carving, a weight crept into the atmosphere. Gareth, a tan man with short blonde hair perpetually hidden behind a baseball cap, shifted uncomfortably in the cramped space. Probably just some drifter, he mumbled, leaning in for a closer look at the inscription. Some bored teenager with a knife, right? He glanced over his shoulder as though expecting a quick chorus of agreement. Claire shrugged, arms crossed. She was the one who discovered the RV listing online, described by the owner as rustic but reliable. They had driven hours to pick it up, none of them suspecting anything more ominous than maybe a musty smell from all the cross-country trips it must have endured. "I guess," she said, her voice subdued. "But I wish I noticed it before we signed the papers. Feels weird." Hannah let her gaze flick from Claire to the others. Martin, a quiet librarian who always kept a paperback novel tucked in his back pocket, and Ruby, who managed a local coffee shop and insisted on wearing colorful maxi dresses that always looked out of place in the desert dust. Right now, Ruby tugged at the hem of her dress as though it might hide her sudden unease. None of them seemed to have a reassuring explanation. They might have dismissed the inscription again, except for a small detail. The carving felt fresh. The edges of each letter were clean with no fading, no traces of old stain or discoloration. A seemingly recent act of vandalism. Where and how it happened was a mystery. No one could recall seeing it when they first set off. The possibility that a stranger had crept in at a gas station and scrawled this threatening phrase churned in each of their minds. No one, however, voiced the fear out loud. They moved on. They had to. That night, they pulled over in a deserted campground. Sagebrush fanned out under a half moon, and they lit a small fire for warmth, pressing close to its glow. They tried to laugh about the day's annoyances, the nearly blown tire, the out-of-date road map, and the questionable hot dogs they consumed for an early dinner, but outward cheer couldn't quite dispel the air of tension. The conversation soon drifted into a shallow hush, and the sound of crackling wood became the dominant voice. "I think it might be some kind of warning," Martin finally said, staring into the flames. His glasses reflected the dancing orange glow, obscuring his eyes. Like the person who owned it before, locked up something they tried to leave behind. He paused, biting his lip. It sounds so personal. Ruby's gaze flicked to the RV towering behind them, as though expecting to see a figure lurking inside. She fiddled with a metal charm bracelet. "You cannot bury what you bring with you," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe it's metaphorical, like secrets or guilt." "Let's not get carried away," Gareth said, though his expression was taut. "We're on vacation. Let's put this behind us." He wore a half grin, but made no attempt to offer another explanation. Soon they all retired for the night, albeit restlessly. The next morning, Hannah awoke in a tangle of sheets. A curious dread lingered in the stale RV air. She rubbed at her eyes, stumbling to the tiny kitchenette area. That's when she noticed something new. Next to the original inscription, more words had been scratched into the wood. "Confess." It was a single word, short but profound in its ominous invitation. Her call to the others was met with stony silence. They gathered around the new message, guilt, shock, and suspicion mingling among them. Who had done this, and why? Garrett stepped closer, eyes roving across the letters. "No way someone snuck in here last night." "It's impossible," Claire said, sounding unconvinced, even as she tried to be certain. "Someone of us is messing around." "Is this a joke?" "I wouldn't joke about something like this," Ruby insisted, her voice trembling. Why would I scare myself? She shook her head, stepping back, as though the words might leap off the wall at her. Maybe we picked up a hitchhiker, Martin suggested, but the quiver in his voice revealed he wasn't really convinced. Though I didn't see any signs of forced entry, the group's discussions led nowhere. By midday, they had rolled out of the campground, half trying to banish talk of the carving. But as the RV rattled along, a grim sense of being watched or judged gathered. Conversations stuttered into awkward silences. Eyes darted around. Anybody could be the culprit, or everyone might be innocent. They had no proof of anything. That night, they decided to park near the next town. It was a small city with one main street flanked by antique shops, a diner, and a single flickering neon sign that read, "Vacancy." The neon buzzed like an insect's wings. They debated sleeping in the RV as usual, but the tension was too thick, so they rented 3 rooms in the tired motel instead. Gareth insisted on paying for his own private room, while Martin and Hannah shared the second, and Claire and Ruby took the third. A hush fell over them at check-in. After dinner at the diner, full of greasy smells and half-hearted smiles, they retreated to their rooms. Hannah walked in silence, footsteps echoing on the worn carpet. Everyone wanted a moment alone to think. Midnight found Hannah wide awake, a dull ache in her brain from replaying the words, "You cannot bury what you bring with you. Confess." She kept hearing them like a heartbeat in her head. Next to her, Martin was breathing deeply, presumably asleep. Unsure why, she felt compelled to return to the RV. She slipped on shoes and gently closed the motel door behind her. The night air was crisp, each breath sharp in her lungs. The parking lot was almost deserted. A single lamp often flickered and hummed overhead, illuminating the weather-beaten RV. Its windows were dark, though, to Hannah, it loomed in the shadows as though alive. She fished the keys out of her sweater pocket and unlocked it. The moment she stepped inside, the beating sense of dread pounded in her chest. She flicked on the overhead light. Everything seemed still until she glimpsed the wall. Another line had been carved, deeper than before, beneath the single word, "Confess." It read, "Who will be the first?" Her heart hammered as she stared at the new message. A million questions rose to her mind. Had she somehow missed it before, or had it only just appeared? Was someone watching her right now? She backed away, turned off the light, and raced out, forgetting she hadn't relocked the door in her haste. At daybreak, before the others had even gathered, she told them what she saw. Gareth immediately blamed the unknown vandal again, while Claire questioned whether Hannah's imagination might be fueling the new text. But Martin noticed a fresh layer of wood shavings clinging near the floor. It had definitely been carved after they left the night prior. The group decided they'd had enough. Vacation be damned, they would investigate. If someone was playing a twisted prank, they wanted answers. They asked around town, hitting the antique store and diner. Most folks shrugged, saying they'd never seen that RV before. The only tidbit of information came from the motel clerk, who recognized the previous owner's name on the registration. The clerk leaned forward over the desk. "That fella, left in a rush. Heard he had some tragedy in his family." As they drove away from the motel, no one spoke. Hannah, behind the wheel, studied the rearview mirror and glimpsed the deepening lines etched in everyone's faces. There was tension in their shoulders, in the set of their jaws. Ruby trembled while staring out the window as town slipped by. Martin clutched his paperback like a lifeline. Claire tried to read something on her phone, but the screen glared blankly. Gareth fiddled with a route map, but the roads might as well have been a labyrinth. The sense of being haunted was choking them all. That afternoon, they agreed to keep traveling. Driving further south, they ventured into an expanse of desert that shimmered in the heat. When the sun hung low, they rolled into another secluded campground. They parked near a bleached-out picnic table and turned off the engine. The hush of the desert was unsettling. They had relocated, but the secret message lurked nearby, scarring their minds. After dinner, a quiet, tense meal, they gathered once again inside the RV. The occupant lighting felt harsh, illuminating fresh wood dust scattered across the floor. More letters had appeared, forming a new line. "Nothing is hidden forever." Shocked, they all stared at one another. accusations skewering the space between them. Anger simmered. Gareth took a step forward. "This has to stop," he growled. "Which one of you is doing this, or do we have some ghost carving these words?" The thunder of their collective pulses roared in the tight confines. Claire's cheeks flushed. "Why are you looking at me?" "I'm not doing this. She swallowed hard, looking away. Ruby's voice quivered. "I'm just tired of feeling like I'm under a microscope. I can't sleep, I can't think." Then Martin quietly said, "These words, they seem to suggest that we're all holding something inside." He didn't look at anyone specifically. "Secrets, guilt. Maybe it's time we acknowledge them." A stricken hush followed. Hannah recognized the tension in each face, fear warring with shame. She had always suspected each of them carried private regrets, but to lay them bare in front of everyone felt unimaginable. The Inscription's sly demand for confession seemed to transform the RV into a confessional box, a stage on which every private sin begged for revelation. Yet no one spoke up. Eventually they retreated for the night, uneasy in their sleeping blankets. Occasional desert winds rattled in the darkness. Hannah sank into disturbed half-sleep, dreaming of letters etched into her skin, secrets ripping through her consciousness. When morning came, she awoke to find Claire rummaging through a cabinet, hurling things aside. "It's missing," she muttered. Hannah rubbed her tired eyes. "What's missing?" Claire turned, eyes brimming with panic. "My phone. Maybe the battery died, but I swear I left it next to my bag." They all searched the RV from top to bottom. Gareth realized his watch was also gone. Martin noticed his book was missing. Ruby discovered her beloved charm bracelet had disappeared from the dashboard. The group's possessions had vanished. The only item left was an old Polaroid camera they'd found in one of the dusty cupboards when they first took the RV. And, once again, new words glared from the wall. "Lie to the group and pay the price." Their fear crackled. Were they punishing each other, or was there some external tormentor? Each missing item was personal. Each one meant something private to its owner. Furious, Gareth punched the table, rattling the plates. "I'm tired of these games. If you want me to confess, here it is. I lied about losing my job. I couldn't afford this trip, but I wanted to get away from the pity at home." He looked up, eyes blazing. "Okay, is that what you sick people want?" Surprise flared in Hannah's chest. She hadn't known Gareth had been fired. She sensed relief bloom in him as soon as the words left his mouth. Yet the effect in the RV was electric, as though a crack had formed in the tension. The others stared, uncertain if that was the secret the carvings demanded. A faint rustle made them all jump. Something small fell from an overhead compartment, landing with a metallic clatter. Ruby's charm bracelet. She lunged to pick it up. The clasp was broken. Quiet followed. An hour later it happened again. In the midst of their frustration and searching, Martin suddenly confessed, quietly, trembling. "I've been lying to my fiancée. I told her I was working extra hours at the library, but I've actually been meeting someone else. An old friend, yes, but there's more to it than friendship." He mumbled something about shame, a heavy sadness in his voice. Upon finishing, he found his missing book lying in the sink, like it had been placed there deliberately. By the time the sun stretched long in the sky, 2 secrets were out. Each confession seemed to relieve the confessor, but pump dread into the others who had yet to speak. Claire's eyes were glued to the side window, refusing to make contact. Ruby's lips trembled as she fiddled with her newly retrieved bracelet. They set up chairs outside that evening, letting the desert air swirl around them. The RV loomed behind, an inescapable presence. Gareth rubbed the brim of his cap. "Now we know. Whatever force is at work wants us to speak. It will keep taking from us until we do." Ruby stared off, tears glinting at the corners of her eyes. "I suppose I do have something. I never told anyone, but I forged an old friend's signature on a bank document to keep my coffee shop afloat. She moved away and never found out, but I've felt horrible ever since." She hiccuped, trying to steady her voice. "I know it was wrong. The business was failing, and I was desperate. A flurry of wind picked up, scattering sand across their feet. When it died down, Hannah spotted Ruby's phone resting near the rear tire. Ruby gasped and rushed to retrieve it. "I can't believe this." She turned it over. It still worked, a single scratch scarring the screen. 3 confessions had been made. Each time an item reappeared, each time the group's fear deepened alongside a strange sense of relief. That night, no new words were carved. The quiet was heavy, but for the first time since the trip began, Hannah slept without nightmares. At dawn, they packed up and drove farther south. Hours melted under a scorching sun. The roads narrowed, winding through ragged, sun-bleached canyons. Everyone took turns at the wheel, though most remained silent. The compulsion to confess had infected them all. Only Hannah and Claire had yet to speak. The knowledge weighed on them. Claire's phone remained missing. Hannah's missing item was unclear. She couldn't pinpoint an object that had disappeared. All she knew was that she felt a knot in her stomach. Perhaps the RV was waiting to see if she would volunteer a confession or if she'd try to escape it. Toward evening, they stopped at a remote gas station that looked half abandoned. Rusted pumps squeaked in the breeze. The group took a break, rummaging for dinner supplies. Gareth was rechecking the tires, Martin was inside paying. Ruby studied an old tourist map pinned to a board outside. Hannah stood alone. She felt like the desert was closing in on her. She had a secret. It was nothing loud or catastrophic, but it followed her like a lurking shadow. She'd once told her little sister, who was struggling with addiction, that she never wanted to see her again. The next week, her sister overdosed. They'd never made amends. She carried that guilt with her. She tried to bury it in her life's busyness and withheld it from her friends, from every close partner. She felt it gnawing at her soul. Now, in the swirl of dust behind that gas station, with the wind whipping her hair, she considered what might happen if she spoke out loud. But she hesitated. The fear of acknowledging that final conversation with her sister pulled her heart in two. Later, under the flickering station light, Claire pulled Hannah aside. Claire's face was pale. "I need to talk," she said, voice trembling. "Can we walk for a minute?" They ambled around the side of the RV. The desert spread behind them, an empty stage. Claire spoke haltingly. "I'm not who I say I am. When we were in college, I stole a major project from a classmate. I passed it off as my own, got a scholarship because of it, and I never admitted it." She swallowed. "It's changed my life. I cheated my way into a career, and I've never told anyone. That's why I always seem so anxious about success. I'm terrified it'll all crumble if someone finds out." A strange hush followed, then a rustle caught Hannah's attention. They both glanced down. Claire's phone lay in the dirt by her feet, its screen faintly scratched but intact. Claire's eyes glistened with tears. She picked it up, holding it like an artifact of some personal redemption. Hannah looked at her. "You feel better?" Claire's tearful laughter stopped as she exhaled. "I do, in a weird way. The guilt, it's out there now." They turned back to the RV. The door was open. Gareth, Martin, and Ruby stood nearby, watching them. Hannah realized she was the last one. She stepped inside, ignoring the dryness in her mouth. On the wall, the message still read, "You cannot bury what you bring with you. Confess. Who will be the first? Nothing is hidden forever. Lie to the group and pay the price." A swirl of phrases that seemed to watch her. She took a shaking breath. Hand pressed against the carved lettering, she spoke out loud, projecting her words to whomever or whatever guided these events. The others hovered outside on the steps, listening. "My sister, I told her not to come near me again when she was at her lowest. I was angry, I was exhausted, but that was the last conversation we ever had. She overdosed soon after. I can't forgive myself." Hannah's throat tightened, tears blooming. "I never told you guys because I can hardly accept it myself. It's my fault. I've tried to bury it, tried to pretend it didn't happen, but..." She stopped, choked by sobs that forced themselves out. She pressed her forehead against the wall, tracing one of the letters. The weight she had carried for so long cracked open. Silence consumed the RV. Then Gareth laid a hand on her shoulder, guiding her away from the wall. Martin lifted her chin, looking at her kindly. Ruby's eyes brimmed with tears of her own. Claire wrapped both arms around Hannah, hugging her wordlessly. In that moment, the air felt charged and vulnerable, shared grief weaving them together. A faint rattling sound behind them drew their attention. They turned just in time to see something shift under one of the seats. Hannah stepped forward and knelt, reaching into the eaves of shadow beneath the worn cushions. Her hand closed around an object that felt small and cylindrical. She pulled it into the dim light of the overhead lamp. Her old house key, the one she'd always kept on a separate keyring to remind her of home, lay in her palm, but she had thrown it away months before, too overwhelmed by memories of her childhood with her sister. Seeing it in her hand now was surreal and unnerving, yet comforting in some bizarre way. She gasped. Her eyes teared up anew as she realized the significance. The RV was giving something personal to her, either returning what she thought was lost or conjuring it from her past. Not an item that had gone missing, but a piece of her own story she had tried to discard. The tension in the RV rippled. Then, so quietly it was nearly inaudible, a scraping sound came from the wall. The group watched in amazement and fear as the letters on the oak paneling seemed to shift. It was as if the carving was smoothing over, minute by minute, old shapes dissolving into the grain. The words began to fade. With trembling hearts, they saw the scrawled phrase, "Confess," melt away first. Then, "Who will be the first?" And one by one the other etched lines vanished, until only the faintest indent remained. "You cannot bury what you bring with you." Then, with a final creak, that too vanished into the wood. No one spoke. The hush was absolute, except for the nervous breaths they all shared. Then the overhead light flickered once, stabilizing again, as though the entire RV exhaled. They spent that night in stunned reflection. In the morning, they tested the ignition. The engine roared to life without protest. A new energy filled the RV, as if it had shrugged off a crushing burden. They drove in relative silence, but there was no fear in it now, only the softness of new understanding. They had shared truths that hurt, but the confession had unburdened them, knitting them into a bond. Around noon, Gareth suggested stopping at a scenic overlook. Rock spires stretched into a blazing blue sky, and the desert air smelled of juniper. The group stepped out and gazed at the horizon. It was both desolate and comforting. They formed a loose ring, absorbing the moment of calm after such an ordeal. Despite the beauty, each of them carried the pang of lessons learned. They had stared into the darkest corners of themselves, forced into confrontation by an unseen presence that left them with new freedom and scars. One by one, they admitted an odd sense of liberation. A vow floated among them, unspoken but shared. To live more honestly with themselves, to face regrets directly. Whether or not the ghosts of their secrets were truly laid to rest, each traveler felt a measure of release that only truth could provide. Hannah's gaze flicked back toward the RV. She couldn't see any carvings inside. She doubted they'd return. She wondered if it had been a coincidence or something supernatural. Either way, their darkest secrets had been pulled from hiding. The carved words might have vanished, but the memories, both painful and redemptive, would linger. They stood between the rocky canyon walls in the silent RV, the desert wind whispering against their skin. The sun blazed overhead. None of them knew what lay ahead on the next stretch of highway, but they understood a different journey had already begun. They started back to the RV, the dust swirling lightly around their feet, ready to continue forward, secrets unearthed, hearts a little lighter, certain that whatever ghosts had haunted them, they would not be forced to carry them alone again.